My name is David Hall, and I've written in three genres. The first is a series of 5 murder mysteries. The most recent one is this. It just came out, Death Most Unholy. I've also written half a dozen children's books and 5 novellas. It's the death, which is described indeed as most unholy. It occurs in a church. After 7 years of working together at Tiny's big security services, Tiny and Angela decide to sell and retire with Danny and Angela. While preparing to celebrate, Danny receives the news that the church secretary at South Presbyterian Church, his former church in Pittsburgh, has passed away on her retirement day. The caller said that Mildred's death was a tragic accident. When the 4 friends travel to Pittsburgh for the funeral, Danny begins to suspect that it may not have been an accident. But who would want dear Mildred dead? And why? I've found in my own experience talking to other authors that it can be very individual, very varied, and even idiosyncratic. Um, so I'm not sure how many people do it the way I do it. But what seems to work for me is I get an idea that kind of stumbles around in the back dusty shelves of my mind where the elves and the writing beast live. And that idea begins to formulate and it gnaws at me. And I actually end up figuring out in my mind what the story is basically going to be about, major characters, how it's going to start, how it's going to end. And when I sit down and actually start to write, it's a matter of letting it flow out and filling in the details. And that's the way I do it. Now, for a full-length novel, because I've tended to work it all out in my mind in advance, it might only take me a couple of months to write. Not doing it, of course, full time, but just occasionally as I'm able to sit down. One of the shorter novellas, which might only be 75 to 80 pages, I might actually do within a couple of weeks. Actually, it tends to be when I can grab a little time, be at my laptop, and very often it's at home, on my desk, at the kitchen table. Sometimes if I have my laptop out with me, sit down at a coffee shop and peck away for a little bit. But it tends to be kind of fragmented times. It's not a consistent, everyday sort of process for me. One of the very few things I know about writing, or at least like to think I know, is to write about what I know. So every one of my books draws out of my own personal life history, experiences, places where I've lived and worked, people and things that I know about. Last year, um, one of my books that was newly published in 2024, won a national award, by the way, was actually 2 novellas under one cover. And the joint title was Murders Downtown and Up North. Well, the first story about murder downtown, I based on the financial district in downtown Los Angeles, where the tall skyscrapers are, which is where I worked in my retirement career. Started out with Merrill Lynch and then went to a smaller regional firm because they made me an offer on the Godfather principle, one that I couldn't refuse. And so that story, which is actually individually titled Last One Standing, is drawn upon my own experience in being a newbie, a probationary broker uh, in the investment world. Now, the second story is actually entitled Murder in Big Mama. And Big Mama is a fish. As a matter of fact, a really large muskellunge. Muskellunge. Toothy cousins of northern pike. Only they get little somewhat larger than northern pike. And they're particularly indigenous to the Great Lakes region, uh, cuting out through the St. Lawrence Seaway. And one of the meccas, if you will, for muskie fishing is in northern Wisconsin. And so I did a murder story, this novella, um, about a group of professional muskie guides, which is indeed a thing in northern Wisconsin, and a death that occurs, and who did it, and why. But it's basically a fishing story. When I retired from my retirement career, which was investments, finance, I had time on my hands, and I thought I'd like to see if I could write something for publication. And I decided to start with something that would be really easy for me, which is outdoor writing. And so I tried writing articles for outdoor magazines. Now, I found this to be more challenging than I thought it might be, partly because in beginning of 2008, the print industry was under great pressure, contracting. And one of the magazines that I aspired to write for example, was Michigan Out of Doors, a very slick, glossy publication. Uh, when I was growing up as a kid, for decades, I read Michigan Out of Doors, a monthly magazine with a couple of special issues, like a special issue before deer season, which is a big thing in Michigan. Well, by the time I tried to write something for Michigan Out of Doors, uh, they had contracted to the point where they were only putting out every other month and virtually no freelance articles. They were using their own staff to write, uh, a matter of money. Um, but this is just a little shameless bragging on my part. Um, they actually accepted the first story I sent to them. And the editor later told me, well, here's the deal. We have a lot of people who have lots of experience and expertise when it comes to fishing, hunting, outdoor sports, but can't put two sentences together. You can put two sentences together. And so I had things published in Michigan Outdoors, Michigan Sportsman, California Sportsman once we moved out here, California Game and Fish, Rocky Mountain Game and Fish, all these different outdoor magazines. Well, that was fun, but remember those dusty stacks in the back of my mind with the elves? I I had the writing beast gnawing at an idea for a murder mystery. So I thought, I'm going to try that. And that ended up being the first in the 5-volume series. The series being called Death Most Unholy, but the very first book I had published was a novel entitled Death Comes to the Rector. Why Death Comes to the Rector? Well, writing about what I know, rectors, as you probably know, are pastors of Catholic or Episcopal churches. And so the poor rector, he bit the dust in the very first chapter. I wrote 4 of them. And again, just drawing all of them out of my own life history and experiences. The second was entitled Death Crashes the Wedding. The third one is entitled Death Stalks the Forest. Got to do my outdoor stuff in that one. The fourth one I intended to be the final. I entitled it Death Not Investigated, in which it was revealed what would happen to the person who was actually behind all of this. Uh, but after that came out and did modestly well, my publisher said, you know, you have quite a few Danny and Tiny fans. Do you suppose you could do a fifth one? I said, yeah, okay. So I did the fifth one and intended it to be the capstone and the namesake for the entire series, Death Most Unholy. I mentioned six children's books. Now, the reason for that is that all of my children's books, which I've written at different reading levels, uh, first couple were picture books for very early readers or read to preschool even. And so they were highly illustrated, professionally illustrated by the publisher. I can't afford to hire an illustrator myself. Um, but every one of the six books is based on old, mostly oral tradition, Native American myths, stories, and legends. That again is out of my own experience because when I was a young man, I spent years, including through my college years and post college, with a number of Native American tribes and reservations, and that in itself is, you know, quite a story. But in the process, I picked up, you know, these stories that would be shared with me. You know, sit down with, oh, Chief Thatcher, for example, who would say, "Well, you know, when I was a young man, our tribal storyteller would talk about how the birch tree came to look the way it does." And so I wrote that down, entitled it the Brave Birch. Yeah, I've drawn from uh, traditionally called Chippewa, Ojibwa, Anishinaabe, Potawatomi, Ottawa, uh, Winnebago, or they nowadays they call Ho Chunk, even as far out as out west, Blackfoot, and some Sioux. So I have stories, you know, from all these different sources, wonderful stories. Um, so anyway, that was a lot of fun writing those, and especially since they're all, you know, very nicely illustrated. It started when COVID got underway, and COVID, of course, was a horrible thing, global pandemic. Uh, who knows, seven figures in deaths certainly. Uh, and while everyone was struggling with and trying to adjust to COVID, this thought entered my head. You know, this is horrible, but there is a global pandemic that's even larger and has been with humanity from the very beginning, for millennia and millennia, that gets far less attention. Uh, it gets denied, it gets covered over, it's certainly undertreated, underfunded, and that's the global mental health crisis. And so every one of my five novellas not only follows a particular storyline, um, but it contains at least dominant elements from the global mental health crisis, uh, mental disorders, and my purpose, of course, is to try to raise awareness, um, and even encourage politicians and others to pay more attention. You know, when we talk about a public issue like homelessness, as you well know, I'm sure, mental health disorders are a tremendous percentage of people who are homeless or houseless. And then I put on little book events like on September 14. I had what I called a book launch party. I held it at the church that we belong to, and I have a very nice core of loyal readers in the congregation, so kind of building support. And then this coming Saturday, I'm very privileged in that each year I've been asked to be one of the featured authors for the Oceanside, California uh, Literary Festival. They call it Right on Oceanside. Literary. It's sponsored by the Oceanside Public Library, Friends of the Library, the Oceanside Cultural Arts Foundation. But this year, they surprised me by saying they wanted me to be the featured author, and an excerpt of Death Most Unholy will be read by students to the assembled, crowd. And then I'm looking forward to the, Escondido Once Upon a Time book fair.